For 30 years as a nurse, I told patients that their environment was part of their medicine. I would walk into a hospital room and feel the air. I'd explain in that calm, steady voice I learned to perfect how a clean, organized space with natural light could genuinely speed up their healing. I saw it happen. I explained how the chaos around a sick person, the cluttered bedside table, the tangled wires, the stack of old magazines, raises their cortisol and slows down their progress. I preach the gospel of order and calm as a clinical intervention, a non-negotiable part of recovery. And every single day for 3 decades, I would finish my shift, hang up my scrubs, and drive home to an environment that I would never, ever have approved for one of my patients. An environment that was actively working against me, though I couldn't see it yet. I was the expert who couldn't read her own chart, the specialist with a glaring house-shaped blind spot that was about to cost me more than I could imagine. At 67, the trouble started. It wasn't a sudden event, but a slow fog rolling in. A low, constant hum of anxiety that had no specific source. Forgetting little things, a name, an appointment, why I'd walked into a room. My mind felt slow, thick. So I did what I was trained to do. I went to the doctor. I submitted to the tests, the blood work, the cognitive screenings. Everything came back with that infuriatingly vague verdict, normal for my age. It felt like a dismissal. But not once in all those appointments did a single doctor or specialist ask me what my home was like. Let me know in the comments. Has a doctor ever asked you about the environment you live in? Just a simple yes or no. In this video, I'm going to tell you what I discovered when I finally made the connection that no medical professional made for me, and why decluttering my home after 60 did more for my mind than any prescription ever could. I'm going to show you the medicine I finally prescribed for myself. The turning point didn't happen in a doctor's office. It happened on a Saturday afternoon at a weekend retreat for former nurses in a beige conference room that smelled faintly of stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. I was sitting on a hard plastic chair under the hum of fluorescent lights, trying to focus on a presentation about cognitive health in seniors. A researcher, a woman half my age, was clicking through slides filled with charts and data. I was listening with my clinical mind, detached, analytical. Then she put up a slide titled Environmental Stressors. She started talking about something called visual noise, the constant low-level energy the brain spends filtering out objects that aren't relevant. She mentioned suspended decisions, explaining how every item left out of place represents a choice not yet made, a task not yet completed, creating a cumulative cognitive load that wears you down. With every bullet point, I felt a cold knot tightening in my stomach. She was describing my house. She wasn't just describing a house. She was giving a precise inventory of my house. The stacks of my late husband's books on the nightstand, untouched for 8 years. The boxes of my mother's china in the spare room, waiting for a decision I couldn't seem to make. The kitchen counter, a graveyard for junk mail, old keys, and receipts. The air in that sterile room suddenly felt thin, hard to breathe. I wasn't Margaret Callahan, RN, observing data. I was a patient on a slide, a case study in cognitive decline. And the thought that hit me was so sharp, so clear, it physically hurt. My God, I've known this for 30 years. For my patients, I preach this every single day. How did I never ever see it for myself? I had been trying to fix the computer when the whole time the problem was the room it was plugged into. I realized I was running out of time to change the room. I saw my old friend Eileen last week, a woman I worked the night shift with for 20 years. We met for coffee, and as always, she was a whirlwind of contained energy. Her hands were never still. While she told me about her upcoming cruise to Alaska, her knitting needles clicked away, a constant, soft percussion beneath our conversation, a blur of gray wool and bamboo. Then her phone buzzed on the table, a bright, insistent reminder for her water aerobics class. She laughed it off, saying, "If I'm not moving, I'm rusting." But I saw something else in that restlessness. I've been to her house. It's warm and full of memories, but it's just as dense as mine was, full of suspended decisions. I realized her frantic schedule, her book clubs and bus tours. It's her way of managing the same cognitive weight I felt. She just never stays home long enough to let it settle on her. She's outrunning it. And I had the chilling thought that this strategy only works as long as you're healthy enough to keep running. I walked out of that conference room and the world looked different. The hum of the fluorescent lights faded, but the researchers' words, visual noise, suspended decisions, they stayed with me, echoing. It wasn't a frightening echo, though. It was clarifying. For years, I've been searching for a complicated answer to what I now realized was a simple problem. I had been looking for a neurological ghost, a phantom in the machine of my mind, when the problem was entirely physical, tangible. It was the stacks of books. It was the boxes in the spare room. It was right there in front of my eyes all along. I drove home that evening, and for the first time, I wasn't just returning to my house. I was returning to my first clinic, the place where my own treatment was about to begin. The work ahead felt huge, yes, but it no longer felt hopeless. It felt possible. I was going to prescribe myself a better environment, and I was going to start immediately. The first thing I had to do wasn't about moving a single object. It was a change in my mind, a reframing. I stopped calling it cleaning or decluttering. I started calling it my treatment, my prescription. I remember standing at the kitchen sink, looking at the sheer volume of things piled on the counter and feeling that familiar wave of exhaustion before I'd even begun. But then I did something different. I went under the sink and pulled out a fresh pair of yellow rubber gloves. The feeling of stretching them on, the soft snap against my wrists, it wasn't the feeling of a chore anymore. It felt like I was scrubbing in for a procedure, a necessary one. I wasn't tidying up a house. I was preparing a sterile field for my own cognitive health. That was the first habit, seeing the work not as a burden on my energy, but as a direct investment in it. Motivation is a funny thing. It shows up when the reason is big enough. I decided to start small. Not the whole house, not even a whole room. I started in the one place where the visual noise was loudest because there were no other distractions, my bedroom. For years, the first thing I saw when I woke up and the last thing I saw before I closed my eyes was a stack of books on my bedside table. Books my book club had chosen, books I felt I should read, books that were supposed to make me smarter, more interesting. They just sat there, gathering a fine layer of dust, monuments to my good intentions. They were a source of low-grade guilt every single morning. I resisted getting rid of them for a week, telling myself I'd get to them. Finally, I just did it. I packed them all in a box for the library. The next morning, waking up to a clear, empty surface, it was like a deep breath. The silence was palpable. You have to win the battle where your mind is most vulnerable first. That's how you build momentum. Then came the hardest part, my late husband's office. I hadn't touched it in 8 years, not a single paper. I told myself I was preserving his memory, but the truth was I was paralyzed by inertia. I was simply failing to make any choice at all. One Tuesday I opened the door. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and dust, his smell. I started with one box, just one. It was full of photographs from his time in the service, hundreds of them. My first instinct was to keep them all, to just close the box and put it back. But the nurse in me took over. What was the therapeutic dose? I sat on the floor for hours, spreading them out, feeling the smooth, cool surfaces. I wasn't just looking at a young man I barely recognized. I was looking for the one image that held the essence of the man I loved. I found it, a picture of him leaning against an old car, smiling, his eyes squinting in the sun. I put that one in a frame. The rest I let go. Grief isn't honored by paralysis. It's honored by choosing what to carry forward. After the emotional weight of that room, I needed something ruthlessly practical. I turned my attention to the flat surfaces, the kitchen counter, the dining room table, the entryway console. These were the landing strips for what that researcher called suspended decisions. So I made a new rule. One suspended decision resolved every single day. It didn't have to be big. One day it was an old warranty for a toaster that broke 2 years ago. I walked it to the recycling bin, and the feeling of finality was absurdly satisfying. Another day, it was a single key on the counter. I had no idea what it was for. For months, I just moved it around. I finally took a breath and dropped it in the trash. It was a tiny act of surrender. I was clearing the physical evidence of my own procrastination. Is there one small thing in your line of sight right now that represents a decision you've been putting off? Just one. Think about what it is. That's where the fog begins. My next checkup felt different. Usually I'd go in as a patient, a list of symptoms to be diagnosed. This time I went in as a collaborator. Dr. Evans did his usual checks, asked about my blood pressure, my sleep. Then he asked, "So, that anxiety you mentioned last time, how's that been?" I didn't just say better. I told him exactly what I'd been doing. I told him about the conference, the visual noise, the suspended decisions. I explained how I'd started treating my home like a clinical environment. I watched his face change. He put his pen down. He leaned forward, his expression shifting from a diagnostician ticking boxes to a man hearing a completely new idea. He said, "Margaret, in 40 years of practice, no patient has ever talked to me about this." I saw in that moment that we have to be advocates for our own holistic health. The system won't ask the right questions until we start providing the answers. I'm a nurse. I believe in data. So I started keeping a new kind of chart, not for a patient, but for myself. It was a simple $5 notebook. I didn't take pictures of the rooms. That felt like it was about aesthetics. This was about function. Every night I'd write down a few things. How many hours I slept without waking. Whether I could finish the whole newspaper article without my mind wandering. I made a little check mark on days when I didn't have one of those frustrating tip-of-the-tongue moments where a word just vanishes. The first time I wrote, "slept 7 hours straight," the feeling was better than seeing any clean countertop. The satisfying scratch of my pen on that cheap paper, documenting my own cognitive improvement, that was the evidence. That was the data that proved the intervention was working. You need to measure what matters or you'll lose the motivation when the work gets hard. These habits didn't work in isolation. They started to braid together, creating a momentum I couldn't have predicted. Clearing the physical suspended decisions on the counter made it easier to make the emotional ones in my husband's office. Getting a full night's sleep, a direct result of the calm in my bedroom, gave me the mental energy to face those bigger tasks. It was a feedback loop. The clearer my space became, the clearer my mind felt. And the clearer my mind felt, the more I was willing to tackle the space. It wasn't a linear process of finishing one room and moving to the next. It was a slow, rising tide that lifted everything at once. I realized that for years my environment had been a system that drained my energy. I was simply, finally, building a new system. One that replenished it. The hardest lesson in all of this was that I wasn't just clearing out objects. I was clearing out old versions of myself. The woman who saved every greeting card because she was afraid of forgetting she was loved. The woman who kept clothes that hadn't fit in a decade just in case the person she used to be decided to show up again. The woman who held on to her husband's entire office because she was terrified that letting go of his things meant letting go of him. Each box I emptied forced me to have a conversation with one of those women. It was exhausting and painful, but it was also liberating. If you've ever struggled to let go of an object tied to a powerful memory, just write "I understand" in the comments. You're not alone in this. It's a quiet, difficult work that no one else can see. With this new clarity, I started seeing the world differently. I saw my friend Eileen. I saw the constant clicking of her knitting needles, the frantic checking of her phone for the next appointment, the way she could never just sit. I used to think it was just her personality, her energy. Now I see it for what it is. She's outrunning the noise in her own home. She's managing the same cognitive weight I was, but her strategy is perpetual motion, perpetual escape. And I feel such a profound sense of compassion for her, because I know that strategy only works as long as you're healthy enough to keep running. I almost chose that path, the path of distraction, but I'm so grateful I was forced to choose a different one, the path of resolution. It's slower and harder, but it means you can finally come home and rest. This process never really ends. That was the final, most important realization. This isn't a project you complete like painting a fence. You don't finish decluttering and then it's done. It's a practice. It's a new way of interacting with the physical world. It's a commitment to maintaining an environment that serves your mind, not one that constantly demands from it. There's no certificate of completion. The reward isn't a perfect house. The reward is the quiet, the focus, the mental energy you get back every single day. It's the ability to sit in a room and feel at peace, not on edge. I wasn't just clearing my house. I was learning a new language of self-care, one that my 30 years as a nurse had somehow never taught me, and it was time to become fluent. You know, for a long time, I thought my memory was like a filing cabinet locked away inside my head. I was convinced the problem was with the files themselves, that they were getting old, misplaced, or corrupted. But that wasn't the problem at all. The real issue was the room the filing cabinet was in. A room so cluttered, so full of visual noise and other demands that I couldn't even get to the cabinet to find what I was looking for. Our homes, I've learned, are not just passive containers for our lives. They are a physical record, a living history of every choice we've made, and more importantly, every choice we've put off. Each box in the spare room, each stack of papers on the table, it's a conversation we haven't finished. And all those unfinished conversations create a kind of static, a low, constant hum in the background of your mind. This work isn't about making things pretty. It's about turning down that static so you can finally hear yourself think again. So now I'm going to talk to you. You've been listening to my story, and I'm willing to bet that parts of it felt familiar. Maybe uncomfortably so. You might be waiting for a doctor to finally give you a name for the fog, a pill, a reason why you don't feel as sharp as you used to. I am telling you, as a nurse who spent her entire life inside that system, they are not going to ask you about your home. It isn't on their checklist. It isn't in their training, but you do not need their permission to conduct your own diagnosis. So do it right now. Pause this video if you have to. Look around the room you are in. Don't just see it. Assess it with a clinical eye. What is this room demanding of your brain at this very moment? Is it helping you? Or is it taxing you? That is the most important medical question you will ask yourself all day. And the answer is the one thing that is completely 100% within your control. In the beginning, I told you that for 30 years, no doctor ever asked me what my home was like. That question, it turns out, was mine to ask and mine to answer. The clarity I was looking for, that feeling of sharpness I thought I had lost, it wasn't waiting for me in a prescription bottle. It was hiding right here, in these rooms, buried under all the layers of a life I hadn't fully sorted through. Now, when I pick up this one framed photo of my husband, the one I chose from all the others, and place it gently on this clear, empty surface, I don't just feel his memory. I feel the solid wood beneath my fingertips. I feel the quiet in the air. Your mind, especially after 60, deserves an environment of peace, not of perfection, but of peace. An environment that supports it, not one that constantly demands from it. If this conversation has started a question in your own mind, please share this video with one person you know who might need to hear it too. And subscribe to keep having these conversations with me. We have a lot more to figure out together.